Well, like I mentioned, we can also look at a key area which is a particular interest of mine, partly because of my interest in leadership, is organizational psychology and what it looks at. And one of the key, very important, critical concepts is the idea of what we refer to as achievement motivation. And achievement motivation is found in a lot of people. Actually, there was a lot of furor and research around this concept and the differences between men and women in terms of their achievement motivation. And the landscape of that has changed considerably. But essentially what we're talking about here is a desire for significant accomplishment. And that means basically, and of course you'd have to define what significant means in someone's mind, what is important to them. But significant accomplishment, and for mastering skills or ideas, for control, and for rapidly attaining a high standard. These folks that have a high achievement motivation are very driven. They will be very single-minded in their efforts to gain an understanding of a particular area and attain a very high standard as quickly as they possibly can. And that's part of achievement motivation. So those who achieve the most are distinguished not so much by natural ability as by hard work and daily discipline. So what the key characteristics here is a lot of hard work and personal discipline. And I was listening just the other day to a couple pro football players talk, and one of them made mention of the fact that the guys that were the most successful, even in the Hall of Fame in football, were ones that had an incredible work ethic. They were reasonably well-talented people. They weren't the top in terms of talent, but they worked their butts off to be able to accomplish this. And so hard work, personal discipline, this also includes self-discipline, their ability to rein in their wants and desires in service to accomplishing some particular goal. And that can be in any particular area. Oftentimes what distinguishes successful people is something that's referred to as just grit, their ability to withstand adversity and stay with the task at hand and work through it. And they see adversity not as something to fold, but something to overcome. And that's part of the backdrop of what we're talking about. So organizations turn to organizational psychologists or OIO psychologists to motivate employees, foster satisfaction, because essentially the work environment has as much to do with performance as it does the individual worker's internal psychology. And so work environment is really key in terms of performance as much as it is the psychology of the worker itself. And that's what IO psychologists are really looking at and focusing on essentially. Now, the other aspect that has gone and been a part of a lot of the work that organizational psychs have done is gone into developing and studying leadership skills and leadership techniques. And your book talks about a variety of those, including social leadership, They also refer to something called task leadership. In both of your classes this week, we looked at which side of the fence you tend to side on, as if you were to be given orientation. If you were given a group of people to get a job done, what would you turn most of your attention to? And we mentioned, and I'll just reiterate this very quickly for you, is we mentioned on an axis that we can talk about emphasis on task and getting something done, and an emphasis on relationship. And the leadership style has everything to do with the emphasis on these two particular dimensions. And when it comes to task and orientation, you can also superimpose on that, and this is something I'm adding here so that you can see it, is that if you add in the dimensions of follower ability and start with 1, go 2, 3, 4, a leader's job is to assess what level the follower is at. That's one of these 4 levels of motivation, and then determine where on this curve that we're talking about, how much relationship is needed. So let's just take somebody at the level 1 here. Is that they're unable, so they've never done the job. It doesn't mean that they're incapable, but they're unable and they're unwilling. So they may be a little hesitant because they don't know how to do the job. Well, a leader has to be very direct, concrete on what they're talking about. And it doesn't mean that there's no relationship. That's why the line doesn't go all the way to the bottom down here. It's some relationship, but most of the emphasis is on getting the task and developing the skill. And so as the person progresses down this line in terms of their willingness and ability, what you find is when they get to this level of 2, they are unable, so they still haven't developed the skill yet, but they are very, very willing to do it. Their willingness is very high. And you might meet people like this, is that they are all gung-ho willing to do it, but they have no clue what it is that they have to do. But if they continue to develop, they get to this point where they are now able and willing and experiencing some success, maybe not as much. And then when we get down to this level, they are very able. They have proven themselves. They are willing. They have also shown the motivation. And a leader has very different skill sets that they have to do. So what I talked about in class is there are quadrants to leadership development, where L1 is really for the R1, which is this one right here. And it is very concrete. The relationship is not high, but it's enough to keep it going, to L2, where the person is unable. They haven't developed the skill yet, but they're very willing, to L3, where they're willing and able, but they're not quite developed yet, to L4, where the person is extremely competent, and the leader's job really is to encourage and resource. And those are just a few of the underlying aspects of that. So this picture over on the side is in your book of a guy who actually basically built his own road, and it is a classic example of achievement motivation. He developed the skills, he did all the work, and is credited with creating this road that gives access to a part of the island that allows people to have access to it. So organizational psych, leadership techniques, I wanted to emphasize what I mentioned to you, and what this is down here is something that's referred to as situational leadership. The core concept of that really has to do not so much with a leader's skill as it does with as it does with a leader's discernment of his followers' needs. And that is my big pitch when it comes to being an effective leader, is to discern the followers' needs and adapt my methods to help them soar to high levels of performance that they've only really just dreamed of.